Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wa sayyidil mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa ahli bayti tahirati ajma'een. Amma ba'du fa'a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. This month is the month of Jumada al-Akhir, and it is the month of the passing of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And inshallah we will talk today about some of his virtues, his fada'il. And after that we have the months of Rajab and Sha'ban, and really the countdown to Ramadan is beginning. May Allah Ta'ala bring us to the month of Ramadan and enable us to benefit from its barakat. Ameen. Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu is, as you know, the closest companion to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam. And he had the unique honor of being Khalifatul Rasul, the one who was the successor to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. After him, the others were the successors of the successors, and they took the title of Amir al-Mu'mineen, the leader of the believers. So Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala who was the one who was Khalifatul Rasul, and collectively the four, and indeed with Sayyidina Imam Hassan radiallahu ta'ala, they are known as the Khulafa Rashidin. Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala who has many well-known names, and amongst his names is Abdullah. So Abdullah ibn Abu Quhafa. So that is his given name. And another of his famous names is Al-Atiq. Al-Atiq means the one who is liberated from the fire. And one narration about this from Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha is that one time the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam was sitting, and Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala entered, and the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam referred to him as the one who was free from the fire. And so because of this, his name, he became known as Al-Atiq. There are different narrations about how these names came about and when the name was taken from, but whether he was already called that or whether he was called that after that incident, we have this narration from Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu ta'ala. There is one dua that we make: Allahumma a'tiq riqabana wa riqab aba'ina min an-nar. Oh Allah, liberate our necks and the necks of our fathers, our forefathers, from the fire. So this a'tiq riqabana, this a'tiq, this verb here, is to liberate. So here al-atiq means the one who is liberated from the fire. And then the other famous name of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq is As-Siddiq. As-Siddiq means the verifier of truth. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, as you know, one of his titles was As-Sadiq and Al-Amin. As-Sadiq means the one who speaks the truth, whereas As-Siddiq means the one who verifies the truth. Sayyidina Abu Bakr As-Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala. And the most well-known saying about this is that on the night of Mi'raj, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said to Jibreel alayhi salam that my people will not believe these events of Mi'raj. And so Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam said that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala will believe. And so this title of as-Siddiq, according to this narration, it was given by Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam. On the tongue of Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salam, this title was given to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And after the event of Mi'raj, when Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala believed in the events as narrated by the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, then this name as-Siddiq became widely used amongst the companions. So these are some of the well-known names of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu: Abdullah ibn Abu Quhafa, and Al-Atiq, and As-Siddiq. If we look at different aspects of his life and his companionship of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we see that first of all, that even in the time of Jahiliyyah, he was one of the leaders of the community. So Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala was amongst those people who were leaders of the community both before and after accepting Islam. So it wasn't just that with Islam he came to prominence, but he was already well respected and held leadership positions in the community, in the Quraysh. One of his sources of expertise, one of the reasons for which he was respected was because he was an expert in genealogy. So if people wanted to trace their lineage, then they would go to Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and he was considered an expert in this matter of tracing the lineage of different people amongst the Arab tribes. And obviously lineage being a very important matter to the Arabs, to be an expert in that field meant that he held a very honorable position. This was one responsibility which he had in the time of Jahiliyyah. Another of his very, very important responsibilities was the settlement of blood money and debts. So in matters where there was a crime committed that involved someone being killed or someone being injured by somebody, and then retribution was exacted and blood money was to be paid in compensation, or if there was a debt to be paid, in these matters Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu was considered a wise adjudicator and a ruler, and his counsel would be sought, and he would advise the people, and he would make rulings about these matters. So you could say in this sense that he was a criminal chief justice. In the matter of in criminal matters, for example, he would be regarded as the chief justice. Obviously the taking of life, the injuring of people, this is one of the most serious crimes in a community. So in these matters, Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu's word would be considered definitive. His judgment would be accepted by the people. So he was already of a preeminent status in the time of Jahiliyyah, and with the advent of Islam, he continued to have a preeminent status amongst the believers as well. And of course, as we said, he was the one who succeeded the Prophet ﷺ after his passing. Regarding the purity of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala, which is mentioned, and I've taken most of what I'm telling you today from the Tarikh al-Khulafa, which is a famous book by Imam Jalaluddin al-Suyuti rahmatullahi alayh. But most of these points come from hadith, from narrations, and he has collected the different narrations around the life of the Khulafa ar-Rashidin. Regarding his purity, it is said that in the time of Jahiliyyah he already avoided alcohol. So this was before alcohol had become prohibited, when it was widespread amongst the community before Islam. Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu already used to say that a man should have his faculties with him, that there should be manliness in him. And by manliness what he meant was that he should be responsible for his actions, that he should be aware, conscious of what he is doing, so that he can live up to the responsibility of what he is doing. So he already had this ihsas, this sensitivity in him, and so he avoided alcohol at that time. And another indication of his purity is there are many narrations, including narrations from the Prophet ﷺ, that he was very quick to accept Islam. That the invitation of Islam, when preferred to Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, was accepted very readily. And this shows that his heart was already pure. He was already ready to accept the truth. And one of the reasons for this is that he had already spent time in the company of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There was already a friendship between them. He had already observed the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He had had experiences with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In fact, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam confided experiences to him. For example, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to walk around in Mecca, and different creations used to call out to him. So he had experiences which indicated to him that something special was going to happen. And Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu would be his confidant in these experiences. He would tell his friend Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu about these events. So he was ready to accept Islam. He believed in the truth of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he was very quick in accepting Islam. This is one thing the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned specifically. He said that people, when I invited them to Islam, they hesitated, they reasoned, but not Abu Bakr Siddiq. He was quick to accept Islam. This is an indication of the purity of his heart. Then one thing which is especially unique about Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and this is something which is the pinnacle, the best of those things, which is his hallmark, that he is unique even amongst the believers, even amongst the Ashra Mubashara, the 10 who were promised Jannah, even amongst the Khulafa ar-Rashidin, that his rank is unique amongst all of these. That amongst those who have high rank, he is the highest ranking after the Anbiya, after the prophets. And the indication of this is that when the Prophet ﷺ migrated from Mecca to Medina, he took only Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu as his companion. And when the Prophet ﷺ's life was in danger, all the others went before or after the Prophet ﷺ, but he was alone chosen for this companionship. A special proximity which he enjoyed with the Prophet ﷺ, a solitude. At the time when the life of the Prophet ﷺ and the deen of Islam was in the most grave of danger, he alone was selected as the companion of the Prophet ﷺ, to carry him on his shoulders, to accompany him up to Ghar al-Thawr, to be his companion at the time of danger. At the most delicate moment of Islam and the most delicate moment of the life of the Prophet ﷺ. When danger came to the mouth of the cave, he was the one who was chosen to be the companion of the Prophet ﷺ. And the testimony of this, we do not need for this narrations and hadith. We have the Qur'an itself. In Surah At-Tawbah, verse 40, Allah Ta'ala recorded in the Qur'an, He said, ثاني اثنين إذ هما في الغار إذ يقول لصاحبه لا تحزن إن الله معنا. This was a unique honor that Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu had, that Allah Ta'ala referred to him in the Qur'an as ثاني اثنين, the second of the two. إذ هما في الغار, when the two of them were in the cave. إذ يقول لصاحبه, when he said to his companion, this is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam speaking to Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu and reassuring him, saying, لا تحزن إن الله معنا. Don't be fearful, surely Allah is with us. That companionship of the cave, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is there and his companion is Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying to him, don't be afraid, surely Allah is with us. That proximity which he had to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which earned him the proximity of Allah, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Inna Allah ma'ana, his protection is with us, his proximity is with us. That makes him unique amongst all of the believers, all of the Sahaba, all of the companions. That indicates his rank being foremost amongst the people after the Anbiya. If we look at his relationship with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we find that there are many characteristic features that ennoble him. After Sayyidah Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha left this world, the first one, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam then comes to Medina, and then only then he marries other women. And amongst those foremost, Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha, the daughter of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu. So, in this way, Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu is also the father-in-law of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is something worth mentioning. That relationships of blood, we don't choose them, but relationships of marriage, we choose them. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam chose to marry the daughters of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala and Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala. And he gave his daughters to Sayyidina Usman radiallahu ta'ala and Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala. So these four Khulafa Rashideen, they all have relationships by marriage with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Two are his father-in-laws and two are his son-in-laws. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam chose to be close to them, to make them members of his family. And something about Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu also, that his father was a companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his son was a companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as well. And his daughter was the wife of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his other daughter also, she helped on the night of the migration, in the events of the migration, she was also involved in helping. So his whole family was dedicated to the service of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In one narration, the Prophet ﷺ was asked, who is the most beloved to you? And he said, Aisha radiallahu anha. Maybe they didn't expect that he would mention the name of a woman. Maybe they thought amongst the men they were asking. But he gave that honor to the women that when it came to the question of love, he brought the name of a woman on his lips. And maybe that was a lesson for them about how to have love in your heart for the woman who shares your life. That love is not just between brothers, but that the one who is your companion, the companion by your side, that he mentioned her first. He said Aisha radiallahu anha. So then they asked him, and what about amongst men? Maybe that was the original question. Maybe that's what they wanted to hear amongst the companions. Then the Prophet ﷺ said, the father of Aisha, Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala. So again, he mentioned Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala, but again he brought the relationship back to Sayyidina Aisha radiallahu ta'ala. Even then he brought the name of Aisha into the answer radiallahu anha. So he showed the position of the wife and the way to love a wife, the gentleness and the love, this وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. He showed the meaning of this, that he brought the name of the wife to the lips when he was asked about love. So Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala, who was a man of knowledge. We already said that he had many responsibilities in the time of Jahiliyyah and afterwards. But he was also a man of bravery. At Badr, the companions set up a position for the Prophet ﷺ in the battle. Obviously in Badr, the odds were very much against them. So the Prophet ﷺ was very much in danger. And they set up a position for the Prophet ﷺ. And then they asked, who will take responsibility for guarding this position? And the one who came forward was Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala. That was the place which would have been the most in danger in the battle. Because if they harm the Prophet ﷺ, then they have won the conflict. The contest is over. So that was the place where there was the most precious prize and the most danger. Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala, who took that position as the bodyguard of the Prophet ﷺ. Many battles it is said that he was the one who was always to be found. If you looked in a battle, he was always to be found at the side of the Prophet ﷺ. So his aim of joining the battle was that the Prophet ﷺ should never be harmed. That if a sword was to fall or an arrow was to fly, it should enter the body of Abu Bakr before it should dare to enter the body of Rasulullah ﷺ. He was there to take any harm that came that was directed to the Prophet ﷺ. He always wanted that harm should come to his body and never touch the body of Rasulullah ﷺ. There is a time mentioned when the Prophet ﷺ was in prayer and the Quraysh, they took him violently, the Prophet ﷺ, and they began to attack him and to beat him up. Again, it was Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala who threw his body in the way and began to fight with them to protect the Prophet ﷺ. Until they beat him until he became unconscious, and when he came to his senses, first thing he asked is, how is the Prophet ﷺ? Again, he didn't worry about his own injuries, but comes to consciousness, the first thought is, how is the Prophet ﷺ? As I mentioned again in Uhud, when the people abandoned the Prophet ﷺ, again it is said that the one to be found at the side of Rasulullah ﷺ, first of all was Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala. If we look at his generosity, the verses of Surah Al-Layl, وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَى, it is said that these verses were revealed about Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu. إِنَّ سَعْيَكُمْ لَشَتَّى, that your efforts are not equal. And then at the end of the surah, verses 17 to 21, surah number 92, Surah Al-Layl, وَسَيُجَنَّبُهَا الْأَتْقَى الَّذِي يُؤْتِي مَالَهُ يَتَزَكَّى وَمَا لِأَحَدٍ إِنْدَهُ مِنْ نِعْمَةٍ تُجْزَى إِلَّا ابْتِغَاءَ وَجْهِ رَبِّهِ الْأَعْلَى وَلَسَوْفَ يَرْضَى. That Allah Ta'ala will protect on the Day of Judgment the one who spends his wealth to purify himself without seeking any reward from anyone except the pleasure of Allah. إِلَّا ابْتِغَاءَ وَجْهِ رَبِّهِ الْأَعْلَى وَلَسَوْفَ يَرْضَى, and soon Allah will be pleased with him. And it is narrated that these verses were revealed about Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala. Of the many examples of his generosity, one which I mention here is that it is said that when he entered Islam, he had 40,000, some narrations say dinar, some say dirham. Dirham is mentioned more often, 40,000 dirhams. And when he left Mecca for migration, he had only 5,000 left. So 35,000 had been spent in the service of Islam. And it is said that he spent this on freeing slaves. Whenever he would find a slave who was weak and oppressed, who was being targeted particularly for entering Islam, then he would buy them and then free them. So 7 slaves, amongst them Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu, it is said, were freed by the wealth of Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala. Once his father said to him, you buy the weak, why don't you buy the strong, so that when you liberate them, they will be there to protect you? If you are going to buy someone, and free them, buy people who are strong so they can protect you, come to your assistance and your aid. And he said, I only do this for the pleasure of Allah. So he wants to help those who need help the most, the weak and the oppressed, so that it will be an investment for him on the Day of Judgment. Not someone to help him in this dunya, but someone who Allah Ta'ala will be pleased with. Then, if we look at his knowledge, some of the things which I mentioned, that after the Prophet ﷺ passed away from this world, many of the Arab people, they reneged on the duty of giving zakat. They said, we will pray because it is bodily worship, but we won't give zakat because that diminishes our wealth. And the other companions tried to advise him that this is not the time to pick battles. Leave well to be. At least they are praying. Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu insisted that the zakat will be paid. Every penny that they paid to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they will be paying. Because he didn't want the ahkam, the faraid, the pillars, the arkan of Islam to be changed. So he wanted the deen to be preserved as it was in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he wanted people to understand that he would fight them if they changed anything. So he took that decision. Then there was a time when the Prophet ﷺ was addressing the companions in his in the late period of his life, and he said that Allah Ta'ala has given a slave a choice between this world and what is with him. And the people didn't understand what was being said. Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala, he began to cry. He was the only one who understood that this meant that the time had come for the Prophet ﷺ to leave this world. And the reference here was to the choice that he had been given, to remain in this world or to go to the company of Allah Ta'ala. So he had this knowledge. Then the other aspect of his ennoblement is that the Prophet ﷺ appointed him as the Imam personally. When the Prophet ﷺ was not able to lead the prayer, then he appointed Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala as the Imam. And he was not pleased with anyone but Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu to be the Imam. Whilst he is present, he wasn't pleased for anyone else to be the Imam. And of course, after the Prophet ﷺ passed away, then he became the Imam in the sense of being the Khalifa of the Ummah as well. According to with reference to his rank, one of the things which is mentioned in the ahadith, and this is one of many ahadith, but one of the ahadith, the Prophet ﷺ was mentioning once that there are 8 doors to paradise, and that people will be called according to their deeds. For example, Bab al-Rayyan, the people who fast will be called. Bab al-Jihad, the people who did jihad will be called. And so Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala said, is there anyone who will be called from all of them? He always wanted to excel, to go to the higher level. He said, is there anyone who will be called amongst all of them? Perhaps this was the feeling in his heart, that the Prophet ﷺ might say that he would be in that category. The Prophet ﷺ said, yes, and I hope that you will be one of them. Meaning that his actions were such that whenever there was a good deed to be done, he was foremost in that. He didn't hold back in any good deed. All of the doors of Jannah, inshallah, will call him. Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala, who was born, according to most narrations, 2 years after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he passed away 2 years after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So at the same age of 63 years. And he was not physically martyred by a sword, but it is said that he was affected by some poison that had a long-lasting effect on him. And he was buried next to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. His grave is near, touching the grave of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So he was nearest to him in this life, and he was nearest to him in the grave. And then he said one time he entered the mosque with Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhuma, one on each side. He said, هَكَذَا نُبْعَثُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامِ. In this way we will be resurrected on the Day of Judgment. He said on the Day of Judgment that the resurrection will begin with the Prophet ﷺ, and then Abu Bakr and Umar radiallahu anhuma will come from their graves. So even on the Day of Judgment they will be together. Even in the graves they are together. Inshallah they will be resurrected together. And Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, this is the month in which he passed away, Jumada al-Akhirah. This is why I chose this topic today. And he asked one time what was the day when he knew he was in his final days. What was the day when the Prophet ﷺ passed away? He was told Monday. And obviously he would have known that, but perhaps in his state of weakness he wanted just to have this dialogue for reassurance. And it was Monday at that time, and he said, I hope it will be before this day and night have passed. And so before the Tuesday began, it is said that he passed away. So he wanted to die on the Monday or the night following Monday, which is the night in which he passed away. So he didn't want it to enter the next day, because he wanted to die at the same time, on the same day as the Prophet ﷺ, and he was granted this wish. So may Allah Ta'ala have mercy, be pleased with Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu and the Ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam through his wasila. And may Allah Ta'ala reward him abundantly for his companionship of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam and his service to Islam. May Allah Ta'ala elevate his ranks in Jannatul Firdaus, and may Allah Ta'ala make our hashr with the likes of him on the Day of Judgment. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum.